Goodbye, Sesame Street.
It's about time. Come on.
Now, wait a minute.
Hey, what's going on here? You? What's wrong?
In 1976, Sesame Street aired an episode that scared kids so badly, it was pulled from TV and locked away for nearly 50 years. No reruns, no home release. Nothing. Just silence. But behind that silence was a real broadcast featuring the Wicked Witch of the West that haunted viewers for decades. Now, it's finally resurfaced. Why was it banned? Who leaked it? And what was so disturbing that Sesame Street tried to erase it? Let's discover. Section 1. The episode that vanished. There's a reason this episode was locked away for nearly 50 years, and it wasn't because of a technical error, lost footage, or copyright complications. It aired once, terrified a generation of children, and was pulled so quickly that many began to question whether it had even existed at all. But what exactly was in this lost broadcast? Why did it shake parents so deeply? And how did something made for toddlers become one of the most sought-after pieces of lost media in history? The answers begin on February 10, 1976. That was the day Sesame Street, one of the most trusted child-friendly shows in television history, aired an episode that would spark an immediate and overwhelming backlash. On the surface, it was supposed to be just another guest appearance. The show had always featured celebrities to keep kids entertained while teaching basic lessons. But this time, the guest wasn't a singer or a comedian. It was Margaret Hamilton, reprising her role as the Wicked Witch of the West from The Wizard of Oz. It had been almost 4 decades since her first appearance as the green-skinned villain, and now she was being invited onto Sesame Street. Not as herself, but as the witch.
Oh, dear. I've got to get my broom back. I can't leave without it. I've got to get it back.
The idea behind the episode was reportedly simple: to teach children about fear and how to manage it through planning and problem-solving. That was in line with Sesame Street's usual educational mission. But something went wrong. Very wrong. The reaction was swift, severe, and unexpected. Parents flooded Sesame Workshop, then called the Children's Television Workshop, with letters complaining that the episode had deeply disturbed their children. Some said their kids refused to go to sleep. Others accused the show of traumatizing their toddlers. The feedback wasn't mixed. It was overwhelmingly negative. Just days after airing, the episode was removed from circulation. Not delayed, not edited, buried. And unlike other controversial episodes that get quietly shelved, this one vanished completely. For decades, episode 847, its official production number, wasn't rebroadcast. It never made it to home video. It wasn't included in anniversary collections or archival databases. It didn't even show up in official episode guides for the 7th season. It was as if it had never existed. And that's where things got strange. In the absence of official information, speculation took hold. Was it really just the witch that scared kids? Or was there something else in the episode? Did Margaret Hamilton's estate object to her performance being used? Could there have been legal complications with MGM, the studio behind The Wizard of Oz? Or was the episode quietly removed because Sesame Workshop didn't want to admit that they had miscalculated what children could handle emotionally? No one knew for sure, and Sesame Workshop never issued a clear explanation. That uncertainty turned episode 847 into an obsession for a small but determined community of media archivists, childhood television historians, and nostalgic adults who half remembered seeing something eerie on their TV screens long ago. The episode began showing up in lost media forums, especially in the early 2000s, as people tried to confirm that it had even aired. Some claimed to remember the broomstick or Big Bird being threatened. Others insisted it had never existed at all. With no footage, no screenshots, and no proof, the episode took on a surreal status. It wasn't just lost, it was erased. Still, people didn't stop searching. Then, in 2022, almost 5 decades after it aired, the impossible happened. An anonymous Reddit user posted a download link containing what appeared to be the full high-quality episode. Not a bootleg, not a VHS rip, a clean studio master of the long-buried Sesame Street episode that had terrified children into silence back in 1976. And just as quickly as it appeared, the uploader disappeared. No name, no explanation. So what really happened in this episode? And why did a children's show treat it like a national secret? Section 2. What really happened in 1976? So what actually aired on Sesame Street that caused such an uproar? What could possibly have been so disturbing in a children's show that it was effectively erased from history? To understand that, we have to go back to February 10th, 1976, the day episode 847 first aired. The story itself, on paper, doesn't seem especially sinister. The episode opens with the Wicked Witch of the West, played once again by Margaret Hamilton, flying over Sesame Street when she suddenly loses her broom. It falls to the ground and lands in front of David, one of the show's regular cast members, played by Northern Calloway. David picks it up, not knowing exactly what it is, but quickly finds out when the witch appears, demanding its return. David refuses, suspicious of her intentions. From that point onward, the witch does everything she can to get her broomstick back. She threatens to turn Big Bird into a feather duster. She threatens to make it rain inside Hooper's store. She even changes her appearance and disguises herself as an ordinary old woman to try and trick the others into giving her broom back. Oscar the Grouch ends up befriending her, amused by her nastiness, while Big Bird, despite being scared at first, gradually grows curious about her. After some back and forth with the residents, she finally reclaims the broom, and then, in one final twist, drops it again more as she flies off, restarting the cycle. The plot is comedic and a little absurd, clearly meant to be more of a misadventure than a cautionary tale. And yet, despite the cartoonish tone and light ending, the reaction from the audience, especially the parents, was anything but amused. According to a press release at the time, the goal of the episode was to explore the emotion of fear and planning, how children encounter fear, how they can respond to it, and how problem-solving can overcome anxiety. That educational purpose fits within Sesame Street's broader mission. Since its launch in 1969, the show had always embraced difficult topics, from grief to disabilities to cultural diversity. But this time, it backfired badly. Almost immediately after the episode aired, the Children's Television Workshop was flooded with letters from concerned, angry, and in some cases outright furious parents. One parent wrote, "The witch that visits your program truly frightens my daughter. This particular character has been criticized by 3 different fellow parents." Another wrote, "I wish you wouldn't put that witch on Sesame Street anymore, because I dream about that witch at bedtime." And another added, "My 3.5-year-old son has been very disturbed and frightened by the witch episode." These were not isolated complaints. The volume of letters was high, and the tone was intense. Some parents accused the show of exposing children to satanic imagery. Others claimed the witch's appearance was equivalent to psychological harm. While that language might sound extreme today, in the context of the mid-1970s, it reflected real fears. This was a time when the satanic panic was beginning to stir across the United States, a period when anxiety over occult symbolism, dark imagery, and supposed subliminal messaging in pop culture began to take hold. Anything that involved witches, demons, or magic was quickly branded as dangerous or subversive by some parts of the public. And while Margaret Hamilton's performance was arguably no more intense than what she had done in The Wizard of Oz, seeing her in character on a cheerful, familiar children's show made the contrast feel unsettling. For some children, the Wicked Witch's green face and piercing voice may have felt real in a way that older fantasy movies did not. But here's where things get even more complicated. After receiving these letters, the producers at Sesame Workshop didn't immediately panic. Instead, they turned to their in-house research team, which had always been a key part of the show's development process. Unlike most children's programming at the time, Sesame Street had always been driven by educational testing, child psychology research, and careful scripting. So, between March 1st and March 5th of 1976, the workshop organized a series of test screenings for episode 847. The sample group consisted of 26 children. Researchers observed their reactions closely, hoping to determine whether the parents' concerns were justified. And what they found was complicated. According to the internal research notes, the children were exceptionally attentive during the witch's scenes. When she appeared, all talking stopped. The children stared at the screen, motionless. That level of attention is normally a good thing. It means the material is engaging. But was it interest or fear? When asked later if the children on screen looked afraid, the test group was split. Half said yes, half said no. When the children themselves were asked whether they were scared, the results were again mixed. Some found the witch funny. Some liked her voice, but others admitted they were uneasy. Most agreed they were happy when she left. From a research perspective, this wasn't a definitive answer. The children didn't break down crying, but they also didn't shrug her off entirely. The fear wasn't overwhelming, but it was real. And for the producers, who were already dealing with public pressure and media scrutiny, this gray area was enough to justify pulling the episode from rotation. The final call was made soon after. An internal memo from the Children's Television Workshop read, "Due to the parents' reactions, the contents of their letters, and our impressions from the group observation data, we suggest that the Margaret Hamilton show not be rerun." With that single sentence, episode 847 was effectively buried. It aired once, maybe twice, according to some scheduling records, but was never rebroadcast. It was excluded from official records. It was not released in syndication, not digitized for archives, and not preserved in any public collection for years to come. But why was the reaction so extreme? Was it truly about the content, or was it about the setting? Seeing the Wicked Witch in the world of Oz is one thing. Seeing her land on Sesame Street is something else entirely. One is fantasy. The other is supposed to feel safe, warm, and familiar. And that dissonance between a terrifying villain and a comforting environment may have been what truly frightened the children and disturbed their parents. There's also the question of Hamilton's performance itself. She did not tone down the character. She appeared in full costume and makeup, delivered her lines with the same intensity as she had nearly 40 years earlier, and showed no trace of parody or self-awareness. For children unfamiliar with the Wizard of Oz, her presence would have felt alien, unexplained, and serious. For those familiar with her, the fear might have been amplified by old memories. Either way, her performance was deeply committed, and in this case, it would take nearly half a century for the world to see the Wicked Witch on Sesame Street again. Section 3. How a children's show became forbidden media. Once Sesame Workshop decided to pull episode 847 from rotation in early 1976, it didn't just disappear from the broadcast schedule. It was quietly erased from nearly every traceable record of the show's history. Unlike other discontinued segments or edited reruns, this episode wasn't stored for later reconsideration or locked away with a public note of explanation. It was never rebroadcast, never released on VHS or DVD, never included in streaming packages or anniversary specials, and never referenced in the official Season 7 episode guide. In fact, according to fans who later visited archives at the University of Maryland and other institutions, both episode 846 and 847 were missing entirely from printed production folders. For decades, anyone looking for documentation would find nothing. This blackout of official records created a vacuum, one that would slowly fill with speculation, hearsay, and fragments of memory. When something disappears without explanation, especially in an era before digital preservation, it doesn't just fade from view. It becomes suspicious. Viewers who had seen the episode, children at the time, grew up remembering flashes of the Wicked Witch threatening Big Bird, or Oscar flirting with a scary old woman, or green smoke swirling over familiar sets. But because there was no available footage, no confirmation from the studio, and no one else who could validate these memories, the episode began to feel like a dream. Was it a special crossover, a Halloween gag, or something they had invented in their heads? That doubt grew stronger with time. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, fans of Sesame Street began gathering online in forums and early websites like Muppet Central. These platforms quickly became hubs for everything related to Jim Henson, the Muppets, and vintage children's television. In these conversations, the topic of Margaret Hamilton's appearance on Sesame Street began to surface. Users would ask, did the Wicked Witch ever guest star on the show? Or was there an episode where Big Bird got cursed? Often, the responses were hesitant. Some people remembered it, others didn't, and almost no one could agree on the details. But one pattern was consistent. Everyone who remembered it vividly, and almost all of them described the episode as frightening or strange. That consistency lent credibility to the idea that something unusual had aired, and that it had been deliberately buried. What started as a shared uncertainty evolved into something closer to an urban legend. The episode became one of those elusive childhood memories that people couldn't fully trust, but couldn't let go of either. How does something shift from a forgotten broadcast to a piece of forbidden media? Why did this particular episode haunt so many people who saw it? Some for only a few minutes. For many children growing up in the 1970s, The Wizard of Oz was a formative experience. But for younger viewers, it wasn't exactly comforting. Margaret Hamilton's performance as the Wicked Witch of the West was intense, relentless, and at times genuinely terrifying. And when a character that's normally confined to scary stories shows up in a trusted environment, on a warm, comforting show like Sesame Street, it can feel like the rules of the world are breaking. This explains why so many people who saw the episode remembered it for decades, even if they couldn't find proof of its existence. The memory was tied not to plot or performance, but to an emotional jolt. And for many, that kind of childhood fear stays buried deep, until a random forum post or discussion thread pulls it back to the surface. The episode's disappearance only amplified that effect. If it had been rebroadcast or discussed openly by the studio, it might have been forgotten over time. But because it vanished so thoroughly, it began to acquire a kind of mythic status. And as the internet matured, so did the scale of the mystery. Fans began digging deeper, cross-referencing episode lists, scouring TV guide archives, and even contacting former cast members. Some claimed to have seen scripts or production stills. Others tried filing Freedom of Information Act requests, despite the episode never being government property. And while most of these efforts went nowhere, the fans' determination showed just how secretly popular this episode had become. Section 4. The Witch Returns and the 2022 upload. For years, the Wicked Witch episode remained nothing more than a shadow, mentioned in passing, half remembered by viewers and ignored by official records. But in 2016, an Instagram post changed everything. One of those generic, scary facts accounts shared a blurb claiming that Sesame Street had aired an episode so disturbing, it was banned forever. That claim caught the attention of a user on the Muppet Central forums who went by the name Gravy. Intrigued and frustrated by the lack of concrete information online, he started a new thread asking if anyone remembered the episode. He admitted later that he may have overhyped it, but that post would become the unofficial launchpad for one of the internet's most dedicated lost media investigations. Gravy's thread quickly became the central hub for the search. Other users chimed in with vague recollections, screen names from the early days of the forum contributing bits and pieces of memory. Some remembered the witch's broom. Others swore they'd seen her flying past Big Bird. But beyond scattered anecdotes, there was still no proof. So Gravy started digging. He emailed Sesame Workshop. He wrote to Carol Spinney, the actor behind Big Bird, using an outdated fan mail directory. He tried reaching anyone who might know something. Producers, archivists, researchers, no one responded. Months passed without any major breakthroughs, but Gravy didn't give up. Slowly, a few clues started to emerge. Someone found blurry images from a production still, possibly featuring Margaret Hamilton on the Sesame Street set. A few others discovered references to angry parent letters stored in the archives at the University of Maryland. One user managed to confirm, through these letters and memos, that the episode had been aired and pulled, not just rumored or imagined. This was the first real confirmation that episode 847 had existed and had been shelved on purpose. Around this time, people started to speculate more seriously about why it was pulled and why it had stayed buried for so long. Some thought it was a legal issue. Perhaps there were restrictions on using the Wicked Witch character outside of MGM's original context. Others believed that Margaret Hamilton's estate had blocked its re-release out of concern for her legacy. But the most widely accepted theory was simpler, that Sesame Workshop was just too embarrassed. The show had built its reputation on educational programming guided by child development research. Admitting that they had misjudged a guest appearance and that it had scared children badly enough to cause national outrage was not something they wanted to revisit. The silence, many believed, was a strategy to move on without reopening old wounds. But the mystery only grew deeper. In early 2019, a seemingly unrelated announcement added fuel to the fire. Sesame Workshop partnered with the American Archive of Public Broadcasting to donate over 4,500 digitized episodes from Sesame Street's 50-year history. These episodes were not made available online. Instead, they were stored at the Library of Congress and could only be viewed in person by appointment, either in Washington, D.C. or at WGBH in Boston. The full list of episodes was never released publicly, and there was no confirmation as to whether episode 847 was among them. Then, a new image surfaced, a high-quality screenshot of Margaret Hamilton in full costume on the Sesame Street set. This wasn't a blurry fan scan or a camera photo of a newspaper clipping. It looked like a frame pulled directly from a master copy, something never shown during the public screenings. Muppet Wiki quietly updated their page for the episode with this image, but gave no details about where it came from. When asked, one of the administrators allegedly replied that the episode isn't lost and that more would be shared eventually, but they refused to confirm the source of the screenshot. Later that same year, the Museum of the Moving Image in New York hosted a special event titled Lost and Found: Rare Sesame Street Footage. It featured obscure and unreleased segments from across the show's history, including the rarely seen Cracks animation and clips from the infamous divorce episode. Toward the end of the event, a surprise announcement was made. They would be screening parts of the Wicked Witch episode. Audience members were asked not to record or photograph anything. The footage played, at least part of it, and was followed by a discussion with former Sesame Workshop staff. One attendee asked if there were any plans to release the full episode. The answer was a firm no. According to the panel, the company remained hesitant to acknowledge the episode publicly due to the original backlash and the nature of its removal. Of course, leaks followed. Within days, shaky footage began appearing online. Fragments from the event, muffled audio, and blurry screen captures. One particularly grainy recording showed a brief exchange between Big Bird and the witch. These leaks sparked a fierce debate online. Some fans argued that the episode should be preserved and shared as a piece of media history. Others said that recording a private screening was disrespectful and violated the trust of the people involved. The debate grew so heated that several forums banned discussion of the episode altogether. But the biggest turning point came a year later, in 2021, when the American Archive of Public Broadcasting announced on Twitter that they had experienced a security breach. According to the post, a user had improperly downloaded Sesame Street episodes that were only supposed to be accessible on site. They didn't specify which episodes had been downloaded, but the timing was suspicious. Many believed that the high-quality image of the witch, and perhaps more, had been obtained during this breach. Still, there was no hard evidence, and no one came forward to claim responsibility. Then, out of nowhere, on June 18, 2022, a Reddit user with the handle usarsaparilla170170 posted a link to the full episode. No introduction, just a download link and one brief comment. The user had never posted before and hasn't posted since. The file was a clean, studio-grade copy with no watermarks, something that could only have come from an internal archive or master tape. The community exploded. People rushed to download it before it was taken down. Within hours, it was removed from Reddit, then from the Internet Archive, then from YouTube. But by then, it was too late. Copies had already spread across private forums and file-sharing groups. What viewers finally saw surprised many. Margaret Hamilton's performance wasn't menacing. It was theatrical, sometimes even comedic. The episode was strange, yes, and the tone was off in places. But it wasn't what most would consider traumatizing by modern standards. Big Bird is startled, but never in danger. Oscar finds the witch amusing. The music is whimsical, not dark. The lighting is bright, and yet the emotional tension is real. For children unfamiliar with Hamilton or her character, her sudden appearance in such a familiar space would have been jarring. The threat of being turned into a feather duster may sound silly now, but for a 3-year-old in 1976, it could have landed very differently. Watching it today, the themes feel more psychological than supernatural. The episode deals with power, control, and how children respond to unpredictability. But unlike Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, which would have explained those themes gently and directly, Sesame Street let the witch's chaos play out with minimal commentary. It left children to interpret the fear for themselves, and that may have been the real issue. The rediscovery of episode 847 was not the result of an official release or studio apology. It was the product of years of amateur research, speculation, and digital sleuthing. And even now, the source of the leak remains a mystery. Was it stolen from an archive, leaked by an insider, or simply sitting in someone's drawer waiting to be uploaded? No one knows for sure. Section 5. Fear, Fiction, and Fan Obsession. Forbidden content, especially in the context of children's media, holds a unique kind of power. It pushes against the expectation that children's programming should always be gentle, educational, and emotionally safe. So when this episode came out, it raised a question that has lingered for decades. What are we protecting children from? And perhaps more importantly, who gets to decide what's too much? The obsession with episode 847 wasn't just about recovering a scary broadcast. It was about restoring a missing piece of cultural history that had been deliberately taken out of circulation. People wanted to know what had been hidden from them, not because they expected something graphic or offensive, but because they remembered feeling something intense: fear, confusion, uncertainty, and had grown up with no way to revisit or process that experience. When institutions remove something without explanation, it creates a sense of exclusion. Viewers begin to ask, what else have we been denied? This hunger to recover forgotten or erased media has become a major focus in the digital age. Across fan communities, there's a growing movement dedicated to tracking down lost media, episodes, commercials, films, or songs that were once public and are now inaccessible. A huge part of why the episode continues to fascinate viewers today is the way it dealt with fear. Children's media has always had a complicated relationship with fear. Should kids be shielded from scary ideas, or should they be gradually introduced to them in ways they can understand? For decades, Sesame Street leaned toward the latter, talking openly about topics like grief, disability, and even death. But the Witch episode was different. Instead of guiding children through the fear with narration or comforting explanation, it dropped a menacing character into their world and let the tension unfold. And yet, fear has long been a part of powerful children's storytelling. Think about shows like Courage the Cowardly Dog, which regularly introduced surreal and genuinely creepy visuals and ideas. Think about movies like The Brave Little Toaster, with its themes of abandonment and mortality, or Watership Down, which remains one of the most visually violent and emotionally brutal animated films ever marketed to children. These works didn't shy away from fear. They used it as a narrative tool. They assumed that children could handle complex emotional material if it was framed properly. So was Sesame Street wrong to air the episode, or were parents overreacting? That debate remains unresolved, but it leads into another, more urgent question. Should media institutions have the right to erase history? When an episode, a film, or a performance is pulled from circulation, who benefits from that decision? And who loses access to it? In the United States and many other countries, media companies hold the rights to their own content. They can choose what to release, what to archive, and what to suppress. But as more media becomes digitized and centralized on streaming platforms, we're entering a new phase of cultural control, one where the entire history of a show, a film franchise, or a studio can be rewritten with a few updates to a server. Content can be edited retroactively, removed silently, or altered without explanation. And unless someone has a saved copy, the original version simply disappears. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Click the next video for more exciting content.